The first snow had come early that year, turning the mountains into pale ghosts against a low, sullen sky. Clara Holt trudged along the ragged road leading toward the town of Cedar Gulch, her boots coated with mud and frost, her pack light enough to make her heart ache. The cold wind came down from the peaks like a blade, and she tucked her chin into her scarf. Eyes narrowed on the thin line of smoke rising in the distance, the last sign of life for miles. She was 27, though the mountain winds and the hard years of solitude had carved years beyond that into her face. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Her auburn hair was tied back in a rough braid. Her gloves were worn to threads. Inside the breast pocket of her coat, wrapped in cloth, was one last gold coin, her father's, the last piece of anything she could call her own. The coin had once meant security, maybe even pride. But now, as she reached the outskirts of Cedar Gulch, it was only proof that she had one final choice to make before she disappeared into hunger or the wilderness. The town itself looked half dead. A few stray dogs sniffed through the snow near a collapsed barn. The church bell was rusted, the saloon boarded up. Only the old trading post still stood open, a weak light flickering through its grime-covered windows. She could hear the wind whistling through gaps in the walls as she approached the door. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and dust. Shelves leaned under the weight of canned goods long past their prime. Behind the counter, Jed Maloney sat polishing a shotgun that had seen better days. He was tall and wiry, his beard grey and untrimmed. His good hand rested on the counter. The other, stiff from an old break, hung useless at his side. When the door creaked open, he looked up sharply. "Clara Holt," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Well, I'll be damned. Thought you'd gone south with the rest of the miners." Clara managed a small smile. "South's got nothing for me, Jed. Figured I'd give these mountains one more try before I start begging in the streets." Jed's eyes softened, but not enough to hide the pity. "Ain't much left here either, you know that. Folks scraped every ounce of silver out of these hills years ago. What are you looking for?" "Work, if you've got any." "Supplies if you don't," Jed gave a low whistle. "Supplies cost money, Clara. You know how it is. I've got money." She reached into her coat and pulled out the coin. The gold gleamed faintly in the dim light, a soft honey glow that drew Jed's tired eyes. For a moment, he seemed to remember what wealth felt like. "That's real gold," he murmured. "Could buy you a wagon load of food, maybe a room for the winter." Clara nodded slowly. "Or it could buy me a companion." Jed frowned. "What do you mean?" She gestured out the window. There, tethered to a post, stood a mule so pitiful she could hardly look at him without feeling something twist in her chest. His coat was patchy, his ribs sharp beneath his skin, and one of his ears hung half-torn. Yet when she'd passed earlier that morning, his eyes had followed her, dark, deep, and strangely alert. "That mule," she said quietly. "What's his story?" Jed followed her gaze and snorted. "That bag of bones. Came down from Devil's Spine Ridge last winter. Belonged to a prospector, Elias Gray, I think. Man froze solid in a cave when the storm hit. The mule wandered down half dead. Been sitting there ever since. He's still alive," Clara said softly. "That's enough," Jed barked a short laugh. "Alive, maybe, but barely. You'd be better off buying grain or a rifle." Clara placed the coin on the counter. "1 gold coin," she said. "For him." Jed looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You're serious?" "I am." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're a stubborn one, Clara Holt. Always were. All right. If you want the beast, he's yours. But don't say I didn't warn you. You'll be feeding him your boots by the end of the week." Clara smiled faintly, sliding the coin toward him. "You might be right, Jed, but at least I won't be alone." She took the rope and stepped outside. The mule raised his head weakly as she approached. His breath clouded the cold air in shallow puffs. "Hey there, old boy," she murmured, placing a hand on his rough muzzle. "Looks like you and I are partners now." The mule blinked slowly, as if trying to decide whether to trust her. She untied him from the post and led him toward the trail out of town. Jed called after her, "You heading north again?" "Maybe," she said without turning. "Depends where he wants to go." The road out of Cedar Gulch wound through pine forest and shallow creeks, climbing steadily toward the snow line. Clara led the mule carefully, her boots slipping on patches of ice. Every few steps the mule stumbled but pressed on, his stubborn will matching her own. She decided to call him Hollow, for the hollow sound of his hooves and the hollow ache in her chest that somehow felt lighter with him beside her. By dusk, they found a small clearing beside a frozen stream. Clara set up her small canvas lean-to and started a fire from dry pine needles. She boiled snow for water, split her last piece of jerky in half, and offered the larger portion to Hollow. He sniffed it uncertainly, then ate. When she reached to pat his neck, he didn't flinch. That small trust meant more to her than she could say. The sky deepened into violet, stars emerging like scattered silver dust. Clara lay back against her pack, watching them flicker. She felt the weight of exhaustion pressing on her, but also something new, a quiet stirring of purpose. She didn't know where she was going anymore, but for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of the silence. She woke before dawn, to Hollow braying softly. His ears were pricked, his gaze fixed eastward toward the ridge. Clara rubbed her eyes and followed his stare. The mountain peaks loomed black against a thin red horizon. "What is it, boy?" she murmured. Hollow pawed the ground, impatient. Then, without warning, he tugged on the rope and started walking. "Hollow!" Clara stumbled after him, pulling her coat tight. The mule moved with surprising strength, following the frozen stream deeper into the woods. She considered turning back, but something in his urgency kept her moving. After an hour, the forest thinned into a rocky slope. The air grew colder, sharper. Hollow stopped suddenly near a jagged cliff, scraping at the ground with his hoof. Clara approached, breath steaming in the cold, and saw something glint beneath the frost. She knelt, brushing away snow. Beneath it was iron, corroded but unmistakable, a hinge. "What the hell?" she whispered, scraping further. The ground revealed a rectangular outline, an iron door, half buried in the earth. Hollow snorted, stamping again, as if demanding she open it. Clara hesitated. "You've got to be kidding me!" But curiosity burned hotter than fear. She found a loose rock and pried at the edge until the door groaned open with a shuddering creak. A rush of cold, stale air spilled out. Steps led downward into darkness. Clara lit her lantern. "All right, Hollow," she murmured. "Let's see what your last owner left behind." She descended carefully, her lantern casting golden arcs on the stone walls. The tunnel was narrow but solid, reinforced with old timber beams. The air smelled of iron and dust. At the bottom, the passage opened into a small chamber. What she saw made her catch her breath. There were tables still standing, covered with mining tools and weathered journals. Grates lined one wall, filled with samples of rock that shimmered faintly under the lantern light. And on the far wall, drawn in charcoal, was a map, a rough sketch of the surrounding mountains, marked with strange symbols. Clara approached the nearest table. One of the journals lay open, the writing faded but legible. The first page read, "March 3rd, 1871. Elias Gray. Found a new vein today. Not silver, not gold. Something else. Never seen light move through stone like this." She turned the page, her pulse quickening. "April 5th. The mule led me to it. He keeps returning to the same ridge, as if he knows something. The rock hums when I strike it. Not sure what to make of that." Clara exhaled slowly. "You were real," she whispered. "And your mule remembered." She looked at Hollow, who stood silently at the base of the steps, his breath fogging in the cold light. His eyes glinted like the strange ore in the crates. The next page sent a chill through her spine. "June 17th, cave-in near the main vein. Mule trapped outside. I can hear him braying. If anyone finds this, follow the markings north, past Devil's Spine Ridge. That's where the heart of it lies. They'll call it Starfall, Starfall." The word shimmered in her mind, electric and alive. Clara closed the book, heart pounding. She had no idea what the man had found, but if Hollow had brought her here, If he remembered this place, then maybe the story wasn't finished yet. She looked back toward the stairs. Outside, dawn was rising, painting the peaks in molten gold. Hollow brayed once, impatient. Clara smiled faintly. "All right, old boy," she said. "Looks like you're not done leading after all." She packed the journals into her satchel, slung it over her shoulder, and climbed toward the light. The mountains waited, vast, unknowable, and full of secrets older than any prospector's dream. As she emerged from the cave, the wind picked up, scattering snow across the clearing. The world seemed to hold its breath. "Starfall," Clara murmured again. "Let's go find it." Hollow flicked his torn ear and began to walk. She looked at Hollow, whose torn ear twitched as if in agreement. "All right, partner," she said, rising to her feet. "We keep moving. We'll find a way to use this, to protect it. Nobody's taking it and turning it into greed again." The wind rose around them, carrying flakes of glittering snow that shimmered faintly blue, like fragments of the very stone buried beneath their feet. And as they walked into the growing night, Clara felt it again, the faint hum of the earth, a heartbeat deep and steady, following their every step. The mountain was awake, and it remembered her name. Dawn came grey and thin over the mountain rim, painting the frost-dusted trees in silver. Clara Holt rose stiffly from her bedroll, her fingers aching from the cold that had settled in overnight. Hollow, the mule, stood a few feet away near the creek, his breath misting in the air like steam. His ribs still showed, but he was stronger now, his coat starting to shine in the early light. She poured a little cornmeal into a pan, mixed it with water, and set it over the fire. The smell of simple food was comfort enough. "Guess we're both getting used to these cold mornings, huh, Hollow?" she murmured. The mule flicked his ear but didn't look up. Instead, he stared into the woods across the creek, as though something there drew his attention. When she followed his gaze, she saw it again, that faint shimmer of movement in the trees. The first time she'd seen it, she thought it was a trick of the wind. The second time, she thought it might be an animal. But now, watching the same ghostly motion ripple between the trunks, she wasn't sure. It looked like a figure moving quietly, almost gliding. Clara's heart quickened. She put down her tin plate and reached for her rifle. By the time she crossed the creek, the figure was gone. The forest was hushed, as if holding its breath. But then she saw something at the base of a cedar tree, a mark cut into the bark, small but deliberate. A spiral inside a triangle. She knelt, touching it with gloved fingers. It was fresh. "Someone's been here," she whispered, "and not just anyone." That mark was familiar. She'd seen it once before in a leather-bound notebook that belonged to her father. It was his trail cipher, a way he marked routes only he could follow. Her father, Elias Holt, had vanished into these mountains 6 years ago, searching for a lost gold vein. The rumor said he died in a snowstorm, but Clara had never believed it. She'd always thought there was more to the story, and now, standing before that carved symbol, she knew she was right. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She led Hollow along the creek, searching the trees for another sign. The mule was calm but alert, ears twitching every few moments. The terrain grew steeper, the forest thicker. Sunlight filtered through in broken gold patches, glinting off patches of quartz and mica. Around midday, Hollow stopped dead. His hooves dug into the ground, head lifted, nostrils flaring. Clara followed his gaze. There, hidden beneath a tangle of brush and moss, was a faint depression in the ground. When she cleared away the vines, she found the entrance to a cave. A chill crept up her arms. The mouth of the cave was half sealed by fallen rocks, but there was enough space to crawl inside. And above the entrance, etched into the stone, was another spiral and triangle, her father's mark. Inside, the air was damp and cool, filled with the smell of earth and mineral. Clara lit a lantern and crawled deeper, Hollow waiting outside. The passage curved downward, twisting like a serpent. She brushed her fingers along the walls, smooth in some places, jagged in others, until the narrow tunnel opened into a small chamber. Her lantern light flickered across the walls, and she gasped. Dozens of spiral triangle symbols surrounded her, but each was paired with another mark. Small X's, arrows, and circles. It looked like a map carved directly into the stone. At the center of it all was an inscription, scrawled in rough, desperate letters. "If you find this, follow the mule. Trust the ground where he refuses to walk." It was signed E.H. Clara pressed her hand against the wall. "Pah!" she whispered. When she emerged from the cave, the air outside had shifted. The sun was dipping low, bleeding gold light through the trees. Hollow stood waiting, stamping his hooves impatiently. She fed him a piece of dry apple, her mind racing. "Trust the ground where he refuses to walk," she repeated softly. "Guess that means you know something I don't, huh?" Hollow snorted as if in answer. The next few days blurred into a rhythm of searching, marking, and moving. Each time Hollow balked, refusing to step forward, Clara stopped and searched the area carefully. And each time she found something: a carved rock, a scrap of weathered canvas, a tin cup with her father's initials. It was as though Elias Holt had laid a breadcrumb trail for her to find. But there was something else. Shadows moving just beyond her sight. At night, she sometimes heard the snap of twigs, soft whispers carried by the wind. And once, while gathering firewood, she found boot prints near her camp that weren't her own. Someone else was on the trail. On the 5th morning, snow began to fall. Light at first, then heavier. The wind turned sharp, carrying the scent of pine and stone. Hollow trudged on steadily, but Clara could feel the temperature plummeting. They reached a narrow mountain pass just as the storm rolled in full force. Snow whipped sideways, stinging her skin. She found a shallow overhang and coaxed Hollow beneath it. They waited out the storm through the night, huddled together for warmth. The mule's body heat kept her alive. She fed him the last of the oats, whispering into the howling dark, "I'll get us through this, Hollow. You saved me once already. You'll do it again." When the storm finally broke, the world was reborn in white. The forest was silent, the path erased, but Hollow didn't seem lost. He lifted his head, ears pricked, and began walking purposefully toward the rising sun. Hours later, Clara saw something gleaming ahead. At first, she thought it was ice, sunlight glinting off frozen stone. But as she drew closer, her heart began to pound. It wasn't ice. It was metal. A thin vein of gold, running like lightning through the face of a rock wall, her father's gold. She fell to her knees, snow soaking her clothes, tears freezing on her cheeks. "We found it," she whispered. "You really found it, Pa." But even in her awe, a warning burned in her chest. The sound of boots crunching snow came from behind her. She spun around, rifle raised. 3 men stood there, rough-faced, dressed in miner's gear, rifles slung across their backs. Their leader, a tall man with a scar across his chin, grinned. "Well, I'll be," he drawled. "Looks like the stories were true." "Holt's gold vein." Clara's stomach turned. "You've been following me." "Sure have," he said. "Since you left the trading post." "Word travels fast when someone starts buying up mule feed and blasting powder." He stepped forward, gesturing to the vein. "Now why don't you be a good lady and show us where that trail starts?" Clara's pulse hammered. She glanced at Hollow, who stood tense beside her, ears laid back. She could fight, maybe, but 3 against 1 wasn't a fight she'd win. Then she remembered her father's words, "Trust the ground where he refuses to walk." The leader motioned for his men to move closer. Clara backed up slowly toward a stretch of snow-covered ground. Hollow suddenly brayed, pulling hard on his rope. Refusing to move closer, Clara understood instantly. She smiled faintly and took another step backward, right to the edge of where Hollow refused to go. "Fine," she said. "You want the gold? Come and take it," the scarred man smirked, stepping toward her. His boot hit the hidden patch of ground, and the world gave way beneath him. The snow collapsed into a deep sinkhole, swallowing him whole. The other 2 men stumbled back, shouting. One dropped his rifle. The other bolted into the trees. Silence returned as quickly as it had broken. Clara stood at the edge, looking down at the pit. Snow and loose rock continued to fall, burying the man beneath. She turned to Hollow, voice trembling. "You saved us again, didn't you?" The mule snorted and pawed the ground. By sunset, Clara had gathered her things and left the ridge behind. The gold vein would still be there. She wasn't ready to claim it yet, not until she understood the full story. As the last light faded, she followed Hollow along a narrow trail through the pines. The mule moved with calm certainty, as though he knew exactly where to go. When they reached a ridge overlooking the valley, she saw the faint glow of firelight in the distance, a cabin's chimney smoke curling into the twilight sky. Her breath caught. The cabin was old, but she recognized it instantly. The shape of the porch, the angle of the roofline, her father's old homestead, the one he'd built before disappearing into the mountains. Hollow brayed softly, tail flicking. Clara tightened her scarf and whispered, "Then that's where we're headed next." That night, as she camped beneath the stars, she dreamed. She saw her father standing beside a mine shaft, lantern in hand, his face lined and weary. "You're close, Clara," he said in the dream. "But the gold isn't what you think. What I found runs deeper than any vein." When she woke, the first light of dawn was just breaking over the horizon. Hollow was already awake, pawing at the frost-covered ground. Clara stood, brushed snow from her coat, and smiled faintly. "All right, Hollow, lead the way." And together they set out toward the cabin, toward the next chapter of the legend that was only beginning to unfold. The mountain wind was sharp and dry as Clara Holt descended through the frost-hardened pines. The sky above glowed an icy blue, but beneath the trees the air was still and full of ghosts. Hollow moved slowly, hooves crunching on snow. Breath puffing steady white clouds, ahead of them stood the cabin, her father's cabin, dark and silent against the grey morning light. Clara stopped a dozen paces away. The structure leaned slightly, one shutter hanging loose, the roof sagging under years of storms. But it was still there, still whole. The porch steps creaked under her boots as she climbed them. Her hand trembled as she reached for the latch. "Pa," she whispered, voice catching in her throat. The door swung open with a groan. Dust motes danced in the air as sunlight cut through the broken window pane. Inside, everything was frozen in time. Her father's coat still hung on a peg by the door. A coffee pot sat on the iron stove, rusted through at the bottom. A half-written letter lay on the table, the ink long faded. Clara brushed her fingers over the paper, heart pounding. "To whoever finds this, if you see Clara, tell her the gold wasn't what I thought. The mountain hides something older, something that breathes beneath the stone." The rest of the letter was smeared, unreadable. Clara's pulse quickened. She glanced around the room, scanning every corner. On the far wall hung a map of the mountain range, drawn in her father's neat, cramped handwriting. Red marks dotted the ridgelines and valleys, trails, caves, hidden streams, and one mark circled in black ink near the edge of the map. The breathing cavern. Clara turned at the sound of a soft clatter. Hollow had nudged open a trunk near the hearth, his nose buried inside. She laughed quietly, despite herself. "Hollow, you've got a nose for treasure, don't you?" Inside the trunk lay a bundle of leather-bound notebooks. She lifted one carefully. The pages were filled with sketches of rock strata, hand-drawn maps, and notes scrawled in her father's looping script. The mule refused the eastern pass again. "I believe the ground there is hollow, possibly a sink shaft. The air moves as if something beneath is breathing. If I don't return, whoever follows must not dig too deep." The words sent a chill through her. She looked down at Hollow, who stared back with calm brown eyes. "You really do know more than you let on, don't you?" The mule flicked his tail, and for a strange moment she could swear he understood. Night came quickly. Clara lit the lantern and sat by the hearth, feeding the fire with dry pine. The cabin walls popped and groaned as the frost outside deepened. She studied the map again, tracing the line from the gold vein to the mark labeled the Breathing Cavern. It was about 5 miles east, deep in the cliffs beyond the river bend. Her father had been close, close enough to find something he didn't understand. She felt the weight of his notebook in her lap, the faint smell of leather and smoke. The more she read, the clearer it became. Elias Holt hadn't died searching for gold. He'd been running from something he found, something that frightened even him. Just before midnight, a sound outside snapped her from her thoughts, a branch breaking. She froze, hand drifting to her rifle. Hollow lifted his head, ears forward, nostrils flaring. Another sound, boots crunching snow. Slow, deliberate steps moving toward the cabin. Clara extinguished the lantern and crouched near the window. Moonlight silvered the clearing outside. A man stood just beyond the porch, his face half shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He was tall, lean, dressed in a long coat dusted with frost. "Miss Holt," he called softly. "You don't know me, but I've been looking for you." Her breath caught. "Who are you?" "The name's Abram Vance. Your pa and I worked together years back. He owed me answers, and I reckon now you do too." Clara stayed still, rifle raised, finger tight on the trigger. "You were one of the men following me," she said. "Following?" He chuckled low. "No, miss. I was cleaning up after the ones who were. Found their tracks leading into a hole down by the ridge. Don't expect they made it out." He took a step closer. "I ain't here to rob you. I'm here to warn you. The thing your father found, it ain't gold. It ain't natural." Clara's heart pounded. "You expect me to believe that?" Abram looked toward the dark tree line. "Believe what you want, but that mountain breathes for a reason. Your pa thought it was wind. I saw it open." Before she could ask more, he turned and disappeared into the trees, his voice echoing softly behind him. "Don't follow the mule east, Clara. That way only leads to the mountain's heart, and that heart ain't meant to beat." She didn't sleep that night. The fire burned low, and Hollow dozed beside the door, his sides rising and falling steady, but Clara couldn't shake Abram's words. "It ain't gold. It ain't natural." At dawn, she strapped on her pack and loaded her rifle. She tore the map from the wall, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her coat. "Sorry, Hollow," she whispered. "I know he said not to follow you east. But if that's where my father went, that's where I'm going." The mule stared at her a long moment, then turned toward the rising sun. They reached the river by noon. The current was half frozen, the banks lined with shards of ice. Hollow crossed slowly, careful and deliberate, until they reached the far side. Beyond lay a ravine where the cliffs rose sheer and high, streaked with quartz and lichen. Clara studied the rock face, searching for any sign of a cave. At first she saw nothing. Then Hollow stopped abruptly and refused to move forward. Braying low, the air around them changed, colder, heavier, as if something enormous exhaled beneath the earth. And then she heard it, a faint, rhythmic pulse. Not quite wind, not quite thunder. It was breathing. She found the entrance hidden behind a curtain of dead vines and snow. The air seeping out was warm, impossibly warm for winter. Hollow stamped his hooves, backing away. "I know," Clara said softly, "but I have to see." She lit her lantern and stepped inside. The walls shimmered faintly with mineral veins that pulsed in the light, like veins beneath skin. The deeper she went, the more she felt it, a steady thrum beneath her boots, a heartbeat deep within the mountain. Her father's words echoed in her mind, "Don't dig too deep." At the end of the passage, she found another chamber, larger than any before. A rough wooden scaffold stood in the center, half collapsed, a rusted winch at the top. Below it gaped a vertical shaft that plunged into darkness. On the floor beside it lay her father's mining pick and a journal bound in black leather. Clara knelt, hands trembling as she opened the journal. December 4th, the sound grows louder each day. I thought it was air moving through fissures, but now it rises and falls like breath. The walls pulse faintly with light when the sound peaks. The gold here is different, soft, pliant, almost alive. I don't dare touch it anymore. December 7th. Something spoke from below the shaft. Not words, more like thought pressed against my mind. I feel watched. December 10th. If Clara ever finds this, tell her to forgive me. The mountain isn't a mine. It's a grave. And something inside it has begun to wake. Clara closed the book slowly. her pulse roaring in her ears. A sudden noise behind her made her spin, a pebble tumbling across stone. She raised her rifle, lantern swinging wildly. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a voice from the shadows. "I told you not to come." Abram Vance stepped into the light, face drawn and pale. His coat was torn, his eyes wild. "You shouldn't have come here," he said again. "It's already stirring." Before she could reply, the ground beneath them shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling. The pulsing sound grew louder, faster, like a heart racing awake. The shaft below them began to glow, not gold, but something deeper, shifting like molten amber. Abram's voice cracked. "Run!" But Hollow, standing at the entrance, refused to move. Instead, the mule brayed loud and long, eyes fixed on the shaft. The air rushed outward, hot and alive, as if the mountain itself exhaled. Clara grabbed the journal, her father's pick, and turned toward the light. She could have fled then. She almost did. But something in her father's words, "Forgive me," held her fast. She looked down into the glowing shaft. For just a heartbeat, she saw movement within the light, shapes that looked like hands pressed against glass, like something trying to rise, and then the sound stopped. The mountain went silent. Abram collapsed to his knees, muttering, "It's gone back to sleep." Clara, shaking, whispered, "What was it?" He looked up at her with hollow eyes. "Not gold, not stone. It's the thing that made both." Outside, the snow began again, soft, silent flakes drifting down over the valley. Clara led Hollow away from the cavern, her father's journal tucked against her chest. Abram followed a few paces behind, limping. When they reached the ridge overlooking the valley, she looked back one last time. The entrance was already half buried by snow, the glow gone. She turned to Hollow and smiled faintly. "I think Pa's story isn't finished yet." The mule snorted, shaking his mane, and nudged her gently forward. Clara glanced toward the horizon, the same direction the wind carried the faint sound of breath, fading into silence. And deep beneath the mountain, something stirred once more. The storm had swallowed the mountain by morning. Wind tore through the trees, scattering snow in blinding waves. Clara Holt and Abram Vance trudged side by side, Hollow following close behind, his hooves leaving deep, steady prints in the drifts. They didn't speak for hours. The wind would have stolen their words anyway, but Clara didn't need to hear Abram's voice to know he was afraid. She could feel it, the tightness in his shoulders, the way his hand never strayed far from the pistol on his belt. When they finally reached the shelter of a stone overhang, Clara slumped to her knees and lit the small camp stove she carried. Hollow stood just outside, head lowered against the wind. Abram stared into the storm. "You shouldn't have gone down there," he muttered. Clara didn't look up from the stove. "Neither should you. Yet here we are." He gave a low chuckle. "Your father said the same thing the night we found it. He thought we'd struck a gold vein, pure and clean. But when he saw the light," Abram shook his head, "he changed." "Changed how?" "He stopped talking about gold, started talking about something alive beneath us. Said the mountain was breathing." Clara met his eyes. "He was right," Abram frowned. "That wasn't breath, miss. That was a warning. When the storm broke, they followed the ridge east. The snow glistened under the pale light, the trees heavy with ice. Below them, the river wound like silver wire through the valley. They moved in silence for most of the day until they came across a collapsed tent, half buried in snow. The fabric was torn, and tools lay scattered, picks, rope, and rusted lanterns. Clara knelt beside the wreckage and found a canteen engraved with initials, A.V. She looked up sharply. "This was yours." Abram nodded grimly. "My camp from 6 years ago. When we thought we could follow your father's trail, what happened?" He crouched beside her, brushing snow from a small pile of stones, a makeshift grave. "We started digging near the vein. The ground gave way, swallowed 3 men whole. I heard them screaming from below, then nothing. The earth sealed itself up like it never happened." Clara's throat tightened. "And my father?" "Stayed behind. Said he had to finish what he started." Abram's eyes darkened. "I thought he died down there until I found his mark near the ridge 2 winters later. Then I knew he'd gone deeper. She stood slowly. Then that's where we're going. They reached the next pass by dusk. The wind had died, leaving the forest eerily quiet. The trail wound between towering cliffs streaked with quartz, faintly glimmering in the moonlight. As they made camp, Clara took out her father's black journal again. She flipped to the final pages, the ink faded but legible. The deeper tunnels are not man-made. The walls curve like bone. When the sound rises, the stone moves. I think the gold was never gold at all. She touched the page, tracing the uneven lines. He was scared. Abram poked at the fire. Your father wasn't a man who scared easy. Whatever he saw down there, it broke him. Clara looked up, firelight catching in her eyes. Then I need to see it too. Abram sighed. You're your father's daughter, all right. Stubborn as the mountain itself, she smiled faintly. You got that right. That night Clara dreamed again. She stood inside the cavern, the walls glowing like molten gold. Her father's voice echoed around her, whispering, The gold breathes, Clara. It remembers. When she reached out to touch the wall, it rippled like water. Faces formed beneath the surface. Human faces, eyes closed, as though sleeping inside the rock. She jerked awake with a cry, sweat cold on her neck. Hollow brayed softly nearby. Restless. Abram sat by the dying fire, wide awake. You dream it too? He asked quietly. Clara's breath came shaky. You've seen them, he nodded. In the light of that cavern. The mountain shows you things. I don't think they're dreams, more like memories. Memories of what? Abram stared into the ashes, of whatever it buried. At dawn they packed their gear and pressed on toward the far ridge. The trees thinned, replaced by jagged stone and patches of frozen moss. Clara could feel the faint vibration underfoot again, the same rhythmic pulse as before, like a heart beating below the earth. By mid-morning, they found what they'd been searching for, a narrow fissure in the cliff face, half hidden by fallen snow. Hollow refused to go near it, braying in protest. Clara tied his reins to a sturdy pine and stroked his nose. It's all right, boy. I'll be back. The mule huffed, stamping his hooves. Abram muttered, If he's got any sense, he'll be gone when we get back. Clara raised her lantern. Then let's hope we come back first. The fissure opened into a steep tunnel. The air grew warmer as they descended, the light from their lanterns flickering off walls that shimmered faintly, veins of dull gold running through them like lifeblood. The deeper they went, the stronger the sound became. Slow, steady, alive. The tunnel widened into a massive chamber. Clara stopped dead. The walls here weren't stone, not entirely. They were smooth and curved, almost organic, covered in patterns that looked like fossilized roots or veins. In the center of the chamber lay a dome of gold-like material, half translucent, pulsing softly with light. Abram whispered, What in God's name? Clara stepped forward, drawn to it. It's not gold. The dome shivered as if it heard her. A faint hum rose from it. Low, melodic, almost human. She reached out a trembling hand. Don't, Abram hissed, but before she could pull back, her fingertips brushed the surface. The world exploded in light. For an instant she saw everything, a rush of images flooding her mind. Her father kneeling beside the same dome, weeping. The earth splitting open in fire and light. A shape, vast and terrible, stirring beneath the mountains, and a voice, deep, ancient, and sorrowful, whispering through her thoughts. You woke me too soon. Clara stumbled back with a cry, collapsing to her knees. The dome's glow dimmed. Abram rushed to her side. Clara, what did you see? She gasped for breath. It's alive. The gold. It's not metal. It's tissue. A shell. He stared at her, horrified. A shell of what? Before she could answer, the cavern rumbled. Dust fell from the ceiling. Cracks split the floor around the dome. The sound came again, the deep, rhythmic breath of something enormous. Abram shouted, We have to get out. They ran toward the tunnel, the light behind them flaring brighter and brighter. The mountain trembled like a living thing. When they burst into the cold air outside, the ground bucked beneath them. A distant roar echoed through the cliffs, and a plume of gold-tinted dust rose into the sky. Hollow brayed wildly, tugging at his reins. Clara collapsed against his side, gasping. By the time the shaking stopped, the fissure had sealed itself, a wall of stone where the entrance had been. Abram stared at it in awe. It closed itself, just like before. Clara wiped blood from a scrape on her cheek. It's protecting something. My father tried to warn us. He turned to her, face pale. What did that thing say to you down there? She hesitated. It said I woke it too soon. Abram's jaw tightened. Then we better make sure it stays asleep. That night they made camp on the ridge, too shaken to go farther. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the snow. Clara sat beside Hollow, stroking his coarse mane. The mule leaned against her gently, warm and solid. Abram cleaned his pistol by the fire. You think your father's still down there? She stared into the flames. No, but part of him is. The journal, the map. He wanted someone to understand. To make sure no one else would go digging for gold that isn't gold. He nodded slowly. You think you can keep a secret that big? Clara's eyes hardened. I don't intend to keep it. I intend to protect it. And somewhere far above them, hidden beneath centuries of stone, something faintly luminous pulsed, like a heartbeat deep inside the mountain. The next morning broke cold and bright, sunlight spilling over the ridges like molten silver. Clara Holt rubbed the sleep from her eyes and glanced toward the mule grazing near the stream. Hollow looked better already, still thin, but with a spark of energy that hadn't been there before. His ears twitched toward her as she packed her satchel with the journals and a few small samples of the strange ore she'd found in the hidden chamber, the word from Elias Gray's. Notebook echoed in her mind again and again. Starfall. That word had weight. It sounded less like a name and more like a prophecy. Clara traced her finger across the faded charcoal map she had copied from the wall inside the hidden chamber. The markings were rough, but clear enough to follow. A winding route leading north through a canyon called Devil's Spine, past a frozen lake, then climbing toward a region marked with a jagged star symbol. That had to be it. The Starfall vein. Looks like we've got a long walk ahead, Clara said, tightening her scarf. Hollow grunted softly, as if he agreed. She smiled, slinging her pack across her shoulder. Let's find out what your last owner died trying to reach. The journey north was brutal. The air grew thinner with every step, and the path narrowed into ledges carved by time and frost. Pine trees gave way to stunted shrubs, and the snow deepened to her knees. Hollow trudged beside her, breathing heavy but steady. Clara spoke to him often, not just to pass the time, but because the silence of the high country could twist into something lonely and strange if you let it. You ever think about turning back? She said once, climbing a steep rise. Because I sure as hell do. Hollow flicked an ear toward her, unbothered. She laughed under her breath. Didn't think so. When the wind picked up, she pulled her coat tighter. At times, she could almost swear she heard whispers in it, like faint voices calling from the ridges. Maybe it was just the wind curling through the rocks, or maybe the mountains themselves remembered Elias Gray's footsteps. By the second night, she and Hollow had found a small overhang to shelter under. She built a fire, fed it scraps of dry moss, and opened one of Elias's journals again. The ink had faded, but a few passages stood out clear as the day they were written. May 2nd. The stone isn't natural. When struck, it glows, faint but real. Something within it reacts to heat, to sound, even to touch. I believe it came from the heavens. Perhaps in the Great Fall the natives spoke of centuries ago. Clara frowned. She'd heard old stories of the Skystone, a meteor that had shattered the peaks long before the first miners came. But the idea that its remains might still pulse beneath the earth made her shiver. May 20th. The mule senses it before I do. He stops and listens when we're close. It's as if he can feel the earth humming. She looked at Hollow, lying beside the fire, his eyes half closed. Guess you were the real prospector all along, huh? He blinked slowly, and she could have sworn she saw intelligence flicker there, an awareness that went beyond instinct. When she closed the journal, she couldn't sleep. The mountains were too alive, the air too charged with unseen things. Somewhere above the cliffs, she thought she saw faint light pulsing along the rock face, like veins of silver running through the darkness. She turned over, whispered, "Tomorrow we'll see what you were trying to find." Elias, and finally drifted into uneasy dreams. They reached the first landmark by mid-morning, a sheer wall of basalt rising straight from the valley floor, streaked with white ice and glistening runoff. It was Devil's Spine Ridge, the barrier between Cedar Gulch and the untouched wilds beyond. A narrow pass cut through it, half hidden under drifts of snow. Hollow stopped before it, ears pinned back, nostrils flaring. Clara could feel it too. The air felt wrong here, thicker somehow, as if the mountain were holding its breath. She placed a hand on his neck. "Easy, boy. We'll take it slow." Inside the pass, the world fell silent. The snow muffled every sound but the creak of leather and the muffled thud of hooves. The walls of the canyon rose high on both sides, black stone polished smooth by ages of wind. Strange marks covered them, scratches that might have been old pickaxe scars or something older still. Halfway through, Hollow froze. His head lifted, ears turning forward. "What is it?" Clara whispered. Then she saw it. Half buried in the snow ahead, a body, the remains of a man, little more than bones and tattered cloth, one arm still clutching a pickaxe. A rusted tin cup lay beside him, and around his neck hung a leather strap with a tarnished brass tag. Clara crouched beside him. The tag read E. Gray, her breath caught. Elias. So this was where he'd died, not in the cave she'd found, but on the road beyond it, trying to reach something farther north. She brushed snow from the ground near him and saw faint symbols carved into the rock, small triangles and arrows, pointing forward. He'd marked the way. She took the tag gently and tucked it into her satchel. "You found it, didn't you?" she murmured. "You just didn't make it back," Hollow snorted, pawing at the snow, impatient to move on. Clara rose, voice low. "All right, partner. Let's finish what he started." The trail beyond Devil's Spine opened into a wide basin rimmed with sharp peaks. At its center lay a frozen lake, smooth as glass, glinting blue-white under the sun. Clara's breath misted before her as she stepped onto its surface carefully. The ice groaned faintly beneath her boots. Halfway across, Hollow stopped again, his ears twisting toward the mountain on the far side. He brayed once, low and uneasy. "Something wrong?" Clara asked, glancing up. That's when she saw it. A dark shape half buried at the base of the slope. It wasn't rock. It was wood, the remains of a collapsed mine entrance. Her pulse quickened. She hurried forward, Hollow following reluctantly. As she neared, she saw old timbers blackened by frost, iron bolts eaten by rust. A faint draught whispered from within, carrying the scent of earth and something metallic, sharp and sweet. "This has to be it," she whispered. "The Starfall mine." She tied Hollow to a sturdy pine and stepped inside. The tunnel was narrow but intact, the ground littered with shards of glittering stone. When her lantern light touched the walls, they shimmered. Faint blue veins, pulsing like lightning frozen in rock. The air thrummed softly, a vibration she could feel in her chest. Her breath caught. It wasn't just light, there was sound too. A faint hum, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Clara pressed her palm to the wall. The stone was warm. "Dear God," she whispered, it wasn't ordinary ore. It was alive. She backed away slowly, heart racing. The deeper she went, the stronger the hum became. But then she heard something else, footsteps echoing faintly from behind. Clara turned sharply, lantern held high. "Who's there?" No answer. Just Hollow braying outside, restless. She exhaled shakily and made her way back toward the entrance, every instinct telling her she wasn't alone anymore. When she stepped out into the cold daylight, she froze. 2 sets of tracks. Fresh boot prints led from the trees to the mine, and they weren't hers. Clara's mind snapped to the journals in her satchel, the ones mentioning Starfall ore, the kind of discovery that could make or ruin a fortune. Word must have spread somehow. Jed maybe, or one of the few travelers she'd passed on her way out of Cedar Gulch. Whoever they were, they'd followed her trail. She scanned the tree line and caught a flicker of movement, 2 men stepping out from behind a boulder. One carried a rifle. The other, taller and broader, wore a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, I'll be," the taller man said. "Told you she'd lead us right to it." Clara's hand went to her coat pocket. "You boys lost?" "Not hardly," the tall one said. "Name's Cutter. My friend here's Miles. We used to dig in these parts before the law shut down the mines. Heard a rumor some fool woman was heading north with an old mule and a prospector's map. Figured we'd tag along." Clara's pulse quickened. "You've got bad timing. This place is dangerous. The caves could collapse at any—" "Save it," Cutter said, raising his rifle slightly. "We'll take a look for ourselves. You just hand over what you found, and we'll make sure you don't freeze out here." Hollow brayed, tugging against his rope. Clara's eyes flicked toward him, then back to the men. She forced a smile. "Fine," she said. "You want to see what's in there? Be my guest." Cutter grinned and motioned for Miles to go first. They stepped past her into the mine entrance. Clara waited until they were just out of sight, then grabbed Hollow's rope and ran. Behind her came the sudden, earth-shaking boom of collapsing stone. The Starfall mine had waited decades to bury another secret. Clara didn't stop running until the lake lay far behind her, and the sun dipped low over the peaks. Her lungs burned, her legs trembled. She finally collapsed beside a cluster of frozen pines, gasping for breath. Hollow stood over her, snorting, his eyes wide. "I know," she whispered. "I know. We're not safe yet." From somewhere far off came a faint rolling sound, another cave-in, or maybe an avalanche triggered by the explosion of air within the mountain. Clara stared toward the ridges, glowing faintly in twilight. The veins of light she'd seen before seemed brighter now, like molten rivers beneath the stone. "Whatever's under there," she said softly, "it doesn't want to be found." She reached into her satchel and pulled out Elias's tag, turning it over in her hands. His final words came back to her. They'll call it Starfall. It wasn't just a discovery. It was a warning.
He motioned for his men to move ahead. "Dig anywhere that glows. I want samples before nightfall." They reached a plateau that looked innocent enough. Flat stone, covered in frost, but Clara knew better. This was where her father's first camp had been, and where the earth had swallowed his men. Crane's crew set to work with picks and shovels, laughing and shouting over the clang of metal. Abram leaned close to Clara. "We could let the mountain handle this one." "No," she whispered. "It doesn't deserve to wake again. They don't know what they're calling." She stepped forward. "Stop digging." Crane turned sharply. "You're welcome to watch, Miss Holt, but don't preach." One of his men, a stocky fellow with a red beard, struck something solid. "Got something here, boss." Clara's stomach dropped. "No." He pried up a chunk of gold-veined stone, shimmering faintly in the light. Crane took it, his eyes lighting up. "Magnificent! It's warm." Abram swore. "Put it down!" Too late. The ground beneath them shuddered violently. The laughter died. Tools fell silent. Then came the sound, low, distant, and unmistakable. A heartbeat. Slow, deep, growing louder. The plateau cracked like ice. Panic erupted. Men scrambled as the fissure widened, swallowing tools and snow. A burst of golden light shot skyward, blinding them. "Back! Get back!" Abram roared. Crane staggered, clutching the glowing rock. "This is it! The source!" Clara grabbed his arm. "It's alive! You're hurting it!" He jerked free. "Don't feed me superstition!" The mountain answered. A deafening roar split the air. Not wind, not stone, something between a growl and a scream. The fissure widened into a chasm. Steam poured out, hot and shimmering, smelling of metal and earth. Crane's men fled, some slipping on the ice, others dropping their gear. Clara felt the heat rising underfoot. "Abram," she shouted, "we have to seal it again." "How?" She thought fast. "The fissure's feeding on what they uncovered. We have to throw the rock back in." Crane clutched it tighter, eyes wild. "It's worth millions! It's worth your life!" Before he could react, Hollow charged forward, braying loud enough to echo across the cliffs. The mule barreled into Crane, knocking him backward. The stone tumbled from his grasp and rolled toward the fissure. It fell, and as it did, the glow dimmed. The mountain inhaled, then exhaled, long and low. The rumbling slowed, the cracks stopped widening. Crane lay sprawled in the snow, gasping. Clara knelt beside Hollow, stroking his neck. The mule was panting hard, but alive. "Good boy," she whispered. Abram hauled Crane to his feet. "You're lucky that beast got more sense than you." Crane's face twisted. "You'll regret this. You just buried a fortune." Clara met his glare. "I buried a curse." By the time they returned to town, half the men who'd followed Crane were gone, fled down the valley, terrified. The others whispered of fire breathing beneath the ridge, of eyes in the gold. Crane and his men packed up by nightfall, their wagons heavy with useless stones. Before he left, he stopped in front of Clara at the edge of town. "You think you can keep this mountain to yourself?" he said coldly. "Secrets don't stay buried forever." Clara's voice was quiet, but her eyes were fierce. "Maybe not, but some things are better remembered as legends than found as truths." Crane smirked. "Then you just made yourself part of the legend, Miss Holt." He rode off into the snow, his laughter fading down the road. When the last of the riders disappeared, Abram turned to Clara. "You think he'll come back?" She said, "Men like him always do, but next time they'll find more than they bargained for." She looked up at the ridge, now dark, still, and beautiful in the moonlight. "The mountain's quiet again," Abram said softly. "For now." She smiled faintly. "But even legends have to rest sometimes." Hollow snorted beside her, pawing at the snow. Clara patted his neck. "Come on, boy, let's go home." As they walked back towards the firelight of Ash Hollow, the wind carried a faint sound from the ridge. Not a rumble, not a breath, but something softer. A low, steady heartbeat fading into silence. And for the first time in generations, the mountain slept without fear. The storm rolled down the mountains like a black wave, swallowing the horizon and devouring the last streaks of sunlight. Clara Holt pulled her oilskin coat tighter around her shoulders, urging Hollow to move faster. The mule's sides heaved with exhaustion, but his spirit was as stubborn as hers. They'd followed the map etched into the gold medallion for 3 days straight, through pine barrens, shale ridges, and icy rivers that bit through her boots.
When the rain hit, it came in sheets, drumming against her hat brim and echoing off the stone walls of the canyon below. Clara dismounted, leading Hollow down a narrow slope into a valley that looked like it hadn't seen human life in 100 years. The ground steamed with strange warmth. The air smelled of brimstone and iron. She stopped. Her boots sank an inch into gray silt that shimmered faintly gold when the lightning flashed. "This must be it," she whispered. "The river of ash." Hollow pawed at the ground, snorting. Then suddenly, his hoof struck something solid. A metallic clang rang out, faint but clear under the thunder. Clara dropped to her knees, brushing the muck aside with frantic hands until she unearthed the outline of a buried chest, iron-bound, half-melted, but still intact. Her pulse thundered. After all this time? She grabbed her pickaxe and drove it into the lock. Once, twice. Then the lid cracked open with a groan like a dying breath. Inside, beneath a layer of soot and hardened mud, lay a cache of dull, rough lumps. She picked one up, scraped it clean, and felt her breath catch. It wasn't gold. It was platinum. dozens of pounds of it. The storm raged harder as realization washed over her. The legend had it wrong. It wasn't a gold mine her ancestor had hidden. It was something rarer, heavier, more enduring. The Holt family's secret was not just treasure. It was power, industrial power, enough to change a fortune, enough to build an empire. Lightning struck a nearby tree, splitting it in half. The chest shuddered in her grip, and then the earth itself groaned. The ground began to crack, spewing hot steam. Clara stumbled back, shielding her face. The canyon floor opened up like a throat, swallowing the chest whole. Hollow screamed, a sound so human it chilled her. She lunged forward, trying to grab it, but the earth gave way beneath her. She fell, down into darkness. When Clara opened her eyes, there was no rain, only silence. Her lantern had landed nearby, its glass cracked but still faintly glowing. She was in a vast, underground chamber, walls glittering faintly with crystals and veins of silver-white metal. A narrow shaft of light shone down from the hole she'd fallen through, catching on Hollow's trembling form. The mule had survived the fall, shaken but alive. "Good boy," she rasped, pulling herself upright. Her shoulder burned, but nothing felt broken. "We're not done yet." She scanned the chamber. The ground was uneven, strewn with old mining tools, rusted picks, shattered helmets, and a half-collapsed wooden cart. On its side, burned into the wood, she saw the letters H.H. Henry Holt, her ancestor's initials. Her pulse quickened. He was here. As she lifted the lantern higher, she noticed something else carved in the wall, a sequence of symbols identical to those on the medallion. But here, the lines continued, an extended map leading deeper into the mountain. She followed it, step by step, the air growing warmer and richer with metallic tang. Hollow's hooves echoed behind her. The tunnel widened, then opened into a circular cavern lit by a faint, otherworldly glow. Pools of silvery liquid rippled across the stone floor, pure, molten metal seeping naturally from the rock. Her voice trembled. "The mountain bleeds it." The legend had said her ancestor found gold in the bones of the earth, but this was beyond gold. It was a hidden vein of the planet's raw wealth, untouched and self-renewing, enough to make any empire rise or fall. But then she saw movement. At the far end of the cavern stood a figure, tall, cloaked, unmoving. She froze. "Who's there?" No answer. She stepped forward, hand on her revolver. The lantern light revealed what she thought was a person. It was a statue, or rather, a mummified miner still gripping a pickaxe, his skin blackened and hard as coal. At his feet lay a melted pocket watch, and beneath that, a locket identical to hers. Clara knelt. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a faded miniature portrait of a man she'd only seen in drawings. Henry Holt, smiling faintly beside a younger woman and a child. Her family. She whispered, "You weren't chasing gold. You were trying to protect it." The ground shuddered again, faint tremors rolling through the cavern. Hollow brayed nervously. Steam hissed from cracks in the stone.
Something was happening. Clara backed away, staring as the molten pools began to swirl, forming currents. The veins in the walls pulsed with a strange rhythm, like the mountain itself had a heartbeat. Then she noticed, engraved on the cavern floor, half buried in dust, a symbol shaped like a mule's hoofprint inside a sunburst. The same mark Hollow bore on his flank. Her breath caught. He wasn't a random mule. The creature looked back at her, calm now, almost knowing. His eyes reflected the strange silvery light, and she realized the impossible truth. Hollow was part of the legend too, bred by generations who'd followed this path, descendants of the very pack animals used by her ancestors' miners. He had found her as much as she had found him. The tremors intensified. Rocks fell. The air grew heavy and hot. Clara ran toward Hollow, mounting him in one motion. "Let's go, boy, before it buries us too." They raced back through the tunnels, dust raining down. The passage behind them collapsed in roaring waves. Hollow leapt over a fissure just as the molten pools exploded into sparks of silver. The light from above was growing, closer, brighter. They charged toward it, the sound of falling stone chasing them. With a final surge, they burst out into the stormy night. The earth shook one last time, then went still. Clara collapsed against Hollow's neck, gasping as the rain cooled her burning skin. When she looked back, the canyon was sealed. The ground had risen, closing the wound of the earth. The river of ash was gone. But in her hands, still clutched tight, was one shard of gleaming white metal, the last piece of the Holt vein. Proof that the legend was real. If the world knew what lay beneath those mountains, men like the Black Ridge Mining Company would tear it apart until nothing was left. And yet, her family had kept this secret for generations. Maybe it was her turn now to guard it, not for greed, but for legacy. She buried the shard beneath a cairn of stone and whispered to the storm, "You'll rest now, Henry. Your secret's safe." Hollow stood beside her, ears flicking toward the distant peaks. "Come on, boy," she murmured. "We've got work to do." Months passed. The nearby mining towns whispered about the woman who vanished into the storm and returned with silver in her eyes. Some said she struck a fortune and built a hidden refuge deep in the wilderness. Others swore she'd gone mad and become a ghost, protecting her ancestors' mountain from trespassers. Only a few knew the truth. Clara sold off her homestead and bought a new spread near the foothills, a quiet place where she could live off the land. Hollow grew fat and glossy under her care, and sometimes she caught him staring up at the mountains like he remembered what lay beneath. Then came the letters. Word of her find had reached ears she wished it hadn't. Surveyors, speculators, and government men with polished boots and sharper smiles. They wanted to buy her land, test her soil, trace her family's records. She burned every letter. Until one day, a stranger arrived, an older woman, gray-haired and steady-eyed, who introduced herself as May Holt, claiming to be from a distant branch of the family. "I came for the story, not the treasure. My grandmother used to tell us about the Holt vein, how it was never gold but something purer. I want to make sure no one gets close again." Clara studied her a long moment, then nodded slowly.
Then you'd better start by knowing what we're guarding. That night, under the stars, Clara told her everything. The medallion, the map, the river of ash. May listened in silence, then took out a small leather-bound journal. This belonged to Henry. It's been in our family for generations. I think it's time you had it. Inside were sketches of tunnels, chemical notes about alloys, and a single line written in faded ink. Wealth is not in what we take from the earth, but what we keep safe for those yet to come. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. He knew, she smiled faintly. He always did. The two women watched the dawn rise over the mountain, a thin mist curling through the peaks. Somewhere in the distance, Hollow brayed softly, his silhouette framed by morning light. Clara rested her hand on the journal. She said quietly, "Let them tell their stories. The mountain will keep her truth." And so she became a legend. Not the kind built on gold or greed, but one whispered in fireside tales of a woman who traded her last coin for a starving mule and found something greater than fortune. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.
If the world knew what lay beneath those mountains, men like the Black Ridge Mining Company would tear it apart until nothing was left. And yet, her family had kept this secret for generations. Maybe it was her turn now to guard it, not for greed, but for legacy. She buried the shard beneath a cairn of stone and whispered to the storm, "You'll rest now, Henry. Your secret's safe." Hollow stood beside her, ears flicking toward the distant peaks. "Come on, boy," she murmured. "We've got work to do." Months passed. The nearby mining towns whispered about the woman who vanished into the storm and returned with silver in her eyes. Some said she struck a fortune and built a hidden refuge deep in the wilderness. Others swore she'd gone mad and become a ghost, protecting her ancestors' mountain from trespassers. Only a few knew the truth. Clara sold off her homestead and bought a new spread near the foothills, a quiet place where she could live off the land. Hollow grew fat and glossy under her care, and sometimes she caught him staring up at the mountains like he remembered what lay beneath. Then came the letters. Word of her find had reached ears she wished it hadn't. Surveyors, speculators, and government men with polished boots and sharper smiles. They wanted to buy her land, test her soil, trace her family's records. She burned every letter. Until one day, a stranger arrived, an older woman, gray-haired and steady-eyed, who introduced herself as May Holt, claiming to be from a distant branch of the family. "I came for the story, not the treasure. My grandmother used to tell us about the Holt vein, how it was never gold but something purer. I want to make sure no one gets close again." Clara studied her a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then you'd better start by knowing what we're guarding." That night, under the stars, Clara told her everything. The medallion, the map, the river of ash. May listened in silence, then took out a small leather-bound journal. "This belonged to Henry. It's been in our family for generations. I think it's time you had it." Inside were sketches of tunnels, chemical notes about alloys, and a single line written in faded ink. "Wealth is not in what we take from the earth, but what we keep safe for those yet to come." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "He knew," she smiled faintly. "He always did." The two women watched the dawn rise over the mountain, a thin mist curling through the peaks. Somewhere in the distance, Hollow brayed softly, his silhouette framed by morning light. Clara rested her hand on the journal. she said quietly. Let them tell their stories. The mountain will keep her truth. And so she became a legend, not the kind built on gold or greed, but one whispered in fireside tales of a woman who traded her last coin for a starving mule and found something greater than fortune. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.